by the symbolic economies in which it resides. I ground these systems as key operations within a network of nonprofit organizations that are associated with the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas. The function of each element of the community of practice becomes directly mediated by select power relations that can be unique to the locale that the community operates in. I'd like to begin with the first one by grounding what a community of practice is, followed by some environmental or ecological features that can limit or support the function of such a community, and then end out with some applied examples of a nonprofit community of practice. So, emerging from an intersection between anthropology and learning theory, the community of practice theory, otherwise referred to as the COP, is a conceptual framework to analyze and characterize groups that share a concern, set of problems, or a passion about a topic, who deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. A key element of that definition resides in ongoing interactions, which in this context are constituted by shared channels for communication and the transmission of clearly identified, mutually defined, and mutually carried out practices. Notably, a COP is itself a process. They can have diverse functions and typically become defined with respect to the utility of certain tools and their capacities to meet certain goals. With that in mind, Zorn and Taylor remark about how these systems function when they indicate that COPs are enacted communicatively by participants. The notion of communities of practice captures the complexities of how knowledge is created and shared by those who work and talk together regarding shared objects and in shared situations, and simultaneously it captures the difficulties of attempting to transfer that knowledge to others. Generally, to gain access to the communicative operation of a COP, there are three significant units of analysis to consider that support the organization of the conventions that can become formalized through such communities. Namely, these three distinct features are as follows. So you have one, a shared repertoire, two, mutual engagements, and three, negotiations of a joint enterprise. These three elements provide an interconnected frame to situate the grounds that determine the nature of a given COP under analysis. And as I get into the practical application of each feature of this COP in a nonprofit context, I'll expand upon each of those variables individually. As stated so far, COPs as a framework are open to a wide array of creative interpretations, and therefore an understanding of specific ecological situations is critical to understand the character of how such a community can operate within relational circumstances that contain their own specific nuances. To that extent, to grasp the concrete mechanics that can influence the framework, we have to look at different modeling systems that can account for social environmental characteristics. One may conceptualize this as concentric circles of theory, wherein the COP lies within a broader plane of existence. In the broader concentric circles, you can bring that into focus through the anthropological modeling system known as the symbolic economy. The symbolic economy itself can be broken down into a variety of features, but for our purposes, we're just going to consider two distinct units. So, Sharon Zukin explains that the symbolic economy features two parallel production systems that are crucial to a social group's material as well as intangible life. These are the production of spaces with its synergy of capital investments and cultural meanings, as well as the production of symbols, which constructs both a currency of commercial exchange and a language of social identity. Now, the production of space is rather straightforward. We're talking about how a minimally coded space can be shaped by cultural meanings and gain situated levels of significance for those participating in the process. For example, you could think about how public or government spaces, like a city hall, can become transformed into a cultural place through coordinated forms of action, heritage management, and select power relations. What I mean by power relations in such a context, for example, you can go to a municipal and request a permit for event spaces that can either become approved or they can become denied. And as another example, you could think about how an art or a music venue can be rented out or temporarily leased for a specific event. These sorts of functions are some of the scaffolding of space production, though the production of space is not at all limited to the concept of renting or requesting a municipal permit, because if you own some type of venue, then space production is not necessarily a challenging performance to make, which will become evident through the example I'll share in a bit here. Next, on to the production of symbols. In Persian semiotics, a symbol refers to a conventionally ordered sign form, meaning that its range of significance becomes stable to different degrees via forms of social acceptance, participation with or replication of said meaning, and consistent habits that support the convention or practice over time. Heritage itself can be conceived of as a symbol and can motivate or be a site to produce or reproduce specific conventions by sociocultural groups who seek to sustain the nuances of their customs or even shape the ways spaces become utilized or experienced. So within the global community of practice I'm discussing here, let's key into the production of symbols as it directly relates to Indigenous heritage and forms of cultural expression. Symbols of heritage in a practical sense depend on different variables like how forms of capital are utilized to augment institutional interfaces. And what I mean by an institutional interface refers to the relationship between an organization and what it has to offer. So, put another way, if an institution can be understood as a socially constructed organization or an operation with defined purposes, goals, or strategies for capital management, then interfacing with those selected features refers to the processes through which access to an institution's modalities are made available to a COP. In the context of institutional access, forms of capital are a very important mediating function. So take Bordeaux's forms of capital, or the accumulation of labor associated with domains like social, cultural, or symbolic functions. Social capital, or the connections established between individuals and groups, can act as a lever for institutional access. If you do not have the requisite social capital or social connections, garnering awareness for heritage initiatives can remain dead in the water because the right people have to know a range of information regarding what a specific community of practice may be trying to do in order for directions or assistance to become active. Historically, in the context of the nonprofit sector, specifically in Rhode Island, many initiatives that color the symbolic economy have been focused on the maintenance of colonial-era sites like the bond-sponsored program or the project from 2002 all the way out to 2021 that mostly engaged infrastructures like the 1691 Johnston's Clemens Irons House. This type of monocultural heritage support frequently does not reflect the current cultural demands of the majority of contemporary Rhode Island, let alone the nonprofit sector of Providence, as is evident through the Rhode Island Placemaking Initiative I'll discuss towards the end of this presentation. In culturally diverse settings like Providence, Rhode Island, multiculturalism typically yields more accumulations of cultural capital than monocultural practices do, and they can also have much more experience-based initiatives that reach far beyond just going to an old colonial house. Cultural capital in the context of Indigenous heritage exchange is tremendously important because it is one of the foundations or driving forces that ground reasons for engaging in the first place. If a community of practice is focused on shared concerns, awareness about sets of problems, or passions about a topic, heritage in this equation can be understood as the concern, the sets of problems that emerge from certain challenges, and can itself be the topic that people become passionate about. So to put it clearly, cultural capital can be developed and shared through participation in one's engagement with a COP that focuses on heritage and is often the direct reason people form these communities in the first place. Symbolic capital, in Bordeaux's words, is to say, capital in whatever form insofar as it becomes represented. That means apprehended symbolically in a relationship of knowledge, or more precisely, of misrecognition and recognition. These particular relationships can directly influence the interplay of power relations that shape social worlds, because where there is a social awareness of a given set of practices, there can be a range of acceptance, compliance, cooperation, or resistance to the representation and performance of these different units. So to briefly recap where we're at so far, we have the community of practice as an institution to attend to specific social interests that can revolve around expressions of heritage. The layers of a symbolic economy, meaning the space and symbol production, themselves become moderated by levels of social, cultural, and symbolic capital present in a specific locale. When deliberately accumulated through these shared social practices, these elements can help a given community of practice shape the symbolic economy in which they exist. So, with that recap in mind, let's get into some examples from my case study. As Providence, Rhode Island stands proudly as the cultural capital of the state of Rhode Island, the nonprofit sector in Providence is often characterized by the diverse socio-historical matrices that contribute to the processes that collectively shape the narrative of this city. The Providence Cultural Equity Initiative, known as PCEI, is associated with the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas and is a nonprofit cultural consultant in the cultural sector of Providence, Rhode Island. Over the summer of 2025, I conducted semi-structured interviews with representatives from this nonprofit organization, PCEI, to gain a sense of heritage as a process of formal institutional communication through the broader nonprofit sector. Specifically, I studied how PCEI engages another nonprofit organization in Providence called AS220 to help shape the legacy of the city and elevate Indigenous heritage practices within formal arenas. And I say formal because of the institutional character of a nonprofit organization with its designation as a 501c3 that yields certain capacities to utilize specific funding streams that can be used to safeguard the accessibility of heritage practices. Of particular importance, I learned that the deliberate coordination of nonprofit organizations can facilitate shifts in the nature of these funding streams. In this case, the advancement of specific placemaking grants in the Rhode Island community that were driven from local neighborhood projects out to multi-million-dollar state recovery programs generated through the American Rescue Plan Act. With that point in mind regarding placemaking, a very notable quote from the study situates Indigenous placemaking as, quote, the highest level of placemaking that you can get, because depending on different locales, it is the original place and narrative that is specific and unique to there, end quote. So, for example, think of the Mashapag Nahiganset from the Nahiganuk or the Mashapag spiritual system. There is no other Mashapag from the Nahiganuk anywhere else in the world. So, getting into the three features of the community of practice in this context, I'll begin with a shared repertoire. Because the repertoire of a community and a nonprofit organization, for example, is a resource for the negotiation of meaning, it is shared in a dynamic and interactive sense. A repertoire, otherwise commonly known as a stock of skills or the types of behavior that a person or organization habitually uses, are not typically confined to being existent in one single agent. This is because people share behaviors, have different ranges of similar skills, and can habitually employ these practices in both similar and different ways. Aligning stakeholders' capacities requires the identification of each stakeholder's repertoire so that it may be subsequently be woven into shared practices. So in the nonprofit context, you can understand where to engage repertoires that can become shared through their different Meet the Team pages or the learning about inquiries about nonprofits' missions, goals, and mechanisms through which they drive their achievements or goals through. This is one site to begin understanding how distinct nonprofits, like the one AS220 and PCEI in this case, identify their skills, their experiences, and importantly, their capacities to share these elements with other institutions. So, the shared repertoire of PCEI's team exemplifies over 60 years of experience in domains that include, but for this case are not limited to, academia, the legal world through PCEI's lawyers. These include festival production scales and large-scale marketing initiatives, human services, and cultural and heritage practices. Now, there's a broad array of opportunities to enact this repertoire. However, let's just keep this into the world of heritage and ground these practices in the cultural festival and conference known as the Mashantucket Confestival that has been occurring annually in Providence, Rhode Island. Mashantuka itself is an Algonquian-based term for the place of many trees, and this conference centers Indigenous heritage, the concept of Indigenous futurism, and various initiatives from a global perspective. This conference celebrates, including, but by no means limited to, over the course of the couple of days, local Eastern Woodlands tribal bodies like the Mashapag-Nahagansetts culture, Arawakan and Taino culture down from the Caribbean, as well as international counterparts like traditional Cape Verdean heritage, and much, much more. Notably, a conference requires a location, like a site for presentations, discussions, etc. Just ask Dr. Gray Morning how he procured this space for RIVAS. However, a festival requires spaces as well, but different qualities of spaces than would be necessary for a conference setting. This is where AS220 comes into play to share their tangible repertoire. So, before I said in the process of obtaining a space, inquiries can go out to municipalities for permits. One can ask the university for classroom spaces like RIVAS. A public library can even work. And for the festival side of a similar function, similar engagements can work, but these elements will occur with different actors. In AS220's repertoire, engaging them is a lot more straightforward for PCEI because they maintain themselves 4 mixed-use buildings totaling over 100,000 square feet in the heart of Providence's downtown that represents a $25 million investment in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. So what I'm getting at is that the shared repertoire of a COP can be effectively diffused through intangible resources meeting tangible resources. In this case, PCEI's cultural and social capital, or the production of symbols, meeting AS220's production of spaces. Interestingly, these two institutions have a rich history together and have been mutually engaging, the second feature of our COP, for years. During my study, I became aware that PCEI's chief executive officer launched the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative as a byproduct of winning a $300,000 grant via an innovation fellowship. That grant itself came from another network of nonprofits based in Providence, Rhode Island, that this one operates as a public charity rather than a cultural consultant. So, as PCEI's CEO already had a form of social capital via a good relationship with representatives of AS220, he utilized this financial viability to augment a shared vision between PCEI and AS220. And I'll just sum that vision up by utilizing their value statement of changing how the story of Rhode Island is told and sold, alongside AS220's value statement, whereby AS220 acknowledges the powers of process. Together, AS220 and the Providence community creates environments where people of all ages and all cultures can participate, teach, and learn from one another. When tangible and intangible resources converge, they can help redefine boundaries between shared repertoires and mutual engagements. And to begin closing this out, I want to express some global implications of negotiating this joint enterprise. At Mashantuka, international stakeholders like the Global Cultural District Network, as well as Placemaking X, another international organization with a broad range of engagement, participated in the COP formed between AS220 and PCEI. Their participation enables access to an international platform to elevate Indigenous heritage awareness amongst a defined international community. The representatives of each organization spoke about best practices for placemaking and heritage exchange, and importantly, they outlined strategies through which communities of practice can alter the ways that we can respectfully connect and direct our forms of capital. Importantly, the construction of a heritage circuit through different nonprofits seems to be a significant mechanism through which we, together, can help redefine the symbolic economies in which we reside to a variety of different scales. The structure of other conferences like RIVAS follows similar models that also engage nonprofit organizations. With that in mind, it seems that a good strategy to found a circuit that celebrates cultural heritage can be specifically developed through allied nonprofits that become connected around common goals. This is a particular sort of community of practice focused on elevating Indigenous heritage. By doing so, one outcome of nonprofit alliances could be that representatives of different institutional bases can link together through what each organization has to offer. So, for example, if there's conference panels or presentations, we can come and participate like we're doing today, or we can engage local heritage festivals in places like Providence, where you can go and literally dance and sing with people into the night, or you can engage other placemaking initiatives that are designed to challenge monocultural systems through multicultural celebration with a global megaphone. The more relevant nonprofits respectfully connect, they can reflect on how to coordinate via systems like this methodology of the community of practice, and themselves act as generators to direct and shape specific locales of the symbolic economies in which they exist. And with that in mind, thank you everybody for listening to my talk today.
Okay, we are going to open this up to questions. I will start off with a question, Kevin. So, with regard to multicultural celebrations, one thing, the first time I went to Australia,
Excuse me, is it possible to see you, Professor Great Morning? Is it possible we can't see you on Zoom?
Around with a camera.
Oh, you can talk over here, yeah.
Right, it is. I was standing in front of the camera that's filming differently. All right, there we go. Here we go. I was up front. All right, so when I was in Australia and a high school was told that I was there from the United States and they wanted me to address the General Assembly. One of the things that hit me very quickly was instead of the people there wanting to learn something about history, all they wanted was a song and dance. And so I sat there and they asked me, can you teach us a song? Can you teach us how to dance an American Indian dance? And so I'm curious to know how these multicultural celebrations, what impact that they have other than entertaining a colonizer.
Well, in the specific case that I'm talking about, take the Cultural Heritage Festival that was on Saturday at this locale called the Steelyard in Providence, Rhode Island. I would say the only objective metric to understand entertainment as coming from the basis of the colonizer is that they're not necessarily present because the entire event itself was, defined specifically by the group who is organizing it and putting it on and keeping it a very closed circuit. Sure, there's elements that are, invite and the public can come, but the majority of the event, like today, is actually just a prescribed defined community coming and engaging around specific purposes. Not necessarily even like a public outcall to, entertain the local municipality. It's just that they're utilizing these structures to engage something very similar to what we're doing here today. Oh, is Sydney going? I see he's muted.
Any other comments, questions?
May I?
Yes.
Hello, Alex. Connecting from South Africa, Johannesburg. Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. I understand it's super hard to open something being the super first, and thank you very much for that. And thank you, Prof. Good morning, for raising this from the very start about relationship between being colonizers and Indigenous peoples. Also, when I was like listening your topic, I was thinking I'm quite far from the context, and I quickly Googled about Rhode Island and his history. It's kind of rebellious state, as I understand from Google, and might be also there is a it's somehow connected to being such rebellion, and then supporting this kind of diversity, as a tool of being like opposite from the majority. I don't know. But I was thinking about the capital, and you oftenly use the word capital and the dimension of capital, symbolic capital, like cultural capital. But in terms of reality, there is only one kind of capital. It's the actual money. And I understand this kind of like substituting, cultural capital, social capital that we have, but we don't have the like capital, like all indigenous communities across the globe. And like using the word as cultural capital, do it lead to political capital? So through this cultural representation, people also can produce their voices again and raise more attention to them so they can transform this cultural capital, which is not capital, again, it's not money, to the something political, so to have this the influence, the impact in a society, to provide their needs. Because without political identity, without political presentation, there is nothing we can do. And I'm talking from indigenous perspective, from Russian perspective. Despite the Soviet legacy that brought, elites from indigenous education during the neoliberal capitalistic Putin's regime for the 30 years, we just it was destroyed like totally. And now we have cultural capital with festive and food approach. And again, thank you very much. I absolutely understand it's kind of, yeah, but I believe that's super important discussion. Thanks again.
We have 5 minutes between sessions, so because of the glitches that happened earlier in getting started, I want to make sure that our next speaker is online. So let's see if Chief Yanguska is in the foyer. Do we?
He's sitting right next to me, so I just changed my name.
Okay, so let him move over then, and then I'll introduce him so we can get started. And I always like to try to have a few minutes ahead of things. That way, when things go over a little bit, we have a little buffer to work with. I also want to point out that there is a change that I made on the online. It's on the online schedule, and it's not in the printed schedule. So at 1:40 this afternoon, we'll have Annapurna Pandey give her talk, and Masam Samara will speak in her place at Toro at 3:40. So I made that one switch that you want to be aware of, and that'll happen this afternoon. And I'll make sure that Annapurna, I spoke with her, well, I texted her last night to make sure that she saw that change. So I assume Chief Yanguska is going to move over.
Yeah,
Sitting
he is right now.
Look at that. How about that's a
Thank you,
different.
everyone. Hi, Greg.